Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Coming up, as the Middle East finds itself on the verge of a larger scale war, Ukraine needs Western support more than ever. So where to next for the two conflicts? More on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Russian forces have captured Vuhledar, a strategic town they've been fighting for since the start of the invasion. Former Deputy Justice Minister Marcin Romanowski loses his immunity. And a Polish football star comes out of retirement to join FC Barcelona. Russia has captured Vuhledar in eastern Ukraine after more than 2 years of intense fighting. Kyiv says it's pulled back from the hilltop coal mining town to avoid encirclement by Russian troops. It comes as the country commemorates the Day of Defenders of Ukraine.
This video shows Russian soldiers raising flags in the center of the Vuhledar, a Ukrainian bastion on strategic high ground in the country's east. After 2.5 years, the city has fallen. Now, the main goal for Ukraine is to evacuate its remaining troops, but the task is far from easy.
We are doing everything that's possible to ensure a route of tactical retreat for the infantry, but there are constant attacks. With the help of artillery and drones, we are doing all that we can to maintain a window for the infantry to be able to retreat from the town.
Satellite footage shows the extent of the damage that has been done to the city, which has been on the front line almost since the beginning of the Russian invasion. Vuhledar has strategic significance because of its high ground and its location near the junction of the two main fronts in eastern and southern Ukraine. Its capture could represent a shift in momentum for Russia in its efforts to consolidate territorial control in the eastern Donbas region. Russian media outlets have framed the capture of Vuhledar as a critical win for Vladimir Putin.
We'll see the spike of Russian disinformation messaging also for the West, that its military assistance is futile, that Russia is winning anyway. And of course, he will use it to boost morale inside of Russian military.
Authorities in Ukraine, meanwhile, have launched an investigation into what they say is the apparent summary execution by Russian troops of 16 Ukrainian soldiers who had surrendered on the eastern front line.
This is the largest reported case of the execution of Ukrainian POWs on the front line, and yet another indication that the killing and torture of prisoners of war are not isolated incidents. This is a deliberate policy of the Russian military and political leadership.
This grim news came as Kyiv marked the Day of Defenders of Ukraine. A crowd gathered at the central square in Kyiv to observe a minute of silence for all those who have died protecting their homeland. This woman is holding a picture of her late father, who was killed by Russian troops.
I was thinking about some of the nice moments I had with him. Ukrainians want the war to end as soon as possible, so that no more flags will have to be placed at this square.
Since the Russian invasion began, people have been placing small national flags at the square. They bear the names of soldiers who have been killed during the conflict. There are now thousands of them, and with each passing day, more are being added.
The sky over Israel lit up on Tuesday evening as Iranian missiles rained down on the country. But the attack appears to have caused limited damage, killing just one person, a Palestinian.
Okay, guys, we gotta get off the roof.
Nearly 200 Iranian ballistic missiles were launched against Israel in the evening hours of Tuesday. Despite this, the damage appears to be limited. The IDF acknowledges that some damage was done to Air Force bases, but claims that it was not severe enough to disrupt combat operations. Only one person died in the attack, a Palestinian man in Jericho who was killed by falling debris from an intercepted missile. Just minutes before the barrage began, a terrorist attack took place in the Jaffa neighborhood of Tel Aviv. 2 Palestinians shot and stabbed to death 7 Israeli citizens and wounded a further 17. This was the deadliest terrorist attack in Israel since October 7th and had led to more casualties than the Iranian bombardment. Some analysts worry that an escalation of the conflict in the Middle East might take attention away from Ukraine, causing it to receive less aid.
The United States does not have the luxury of concentrating on any one issue to the exclusion of others. There are those who say we have to abandon Ukraine because of China. There are those who say we must make difficult choices, and Ukraine always seems to lose out when somebody starts using the phrase difficult choices. I think that's a mistake.
On the other hand, Tehran might soon be unwilling to provide weapons to Russia, as it will now need them for its own purposes. Unwilling, or perhaps unable.
It is determined that Israel will hit them back and hard. I think it will include probably an attack on targets of producing, stocking missiles. When we are hitting Iran's ballistic missiles factories, we're basically also defending the Ukraine.
Undeterred by the Iranian bombardment, Israel is pushing forward with its invasion of southern Lebanon. The death of 8 Israeli soldiers in the clashes with Hezbollah was announced on Wednesday. UN peacekeeping troops, including Polish soldiers, are stationed in southern Lebanon. They have not been involved in the fighting between the IDF and Hezbollah, however, and are therefore not expected to suffer any casualties.
The escalation in the Middle East and the ongoing situation in war-torn Ukraine have been hot topics at the Warsaw Security Forum. Our reporter, Marek Steele, has been following the conference.
The war in Ukraine is one of the leading topics here at the Warsaw Security Forum, and to join me here to discuss the situation in Ukraine is General Ben Hodges, former commander of the U.S. Army Europe. Hello and welcome.
Thank you very much for the privilege.
So we've heard the sad news today that another stronghold of the Ukrainian army has fallen. I'm speaking about Vuhledar. How do you assess the situation there?
Well, obviously, Ukraine has paid the price with a lot of their soldiers over the past years, but particularly around Vuhledar. But look, I think if you look at a map and you see where Vuhledar is on the map, that I think maybe there's a lot of overreaction in Europe and in the United States about the strategic significance of this. I would not overstate the strategic significance of it. But there's already, you can hear some of the what I call doomers walking around like, oh my God, Vuhledar has fallen. Yes, okay. And how will that really affect the war on the ground? Not at all.
And what about the escalation in the Middle East? Because we've seen Iran attacking Israel. We've seen a limited incursion into northern Lebanon by Israel. Is the situation there taking away the focus of the West from Ukraine?
It shouldn't. In fact, it should sharpen the focus because these are connected. Iran has one friend in the entire world, Russia. Okay? So if we connect these two, if we think, if we help Ukraine defeat Russia, defeat them, then Ukraine is isolated. Ukraine will have nobody to help them, which would then diminish their ability to support Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. That's a good thing. So, and then as I think about now the pressure that Israel is putting on Iran will be less capable, perhaps, to provide drones and ballistic missiles to Russia.
That's a very interesting take on the matter. This was General Ben Hodges, former commander of the U.S. Army Europe. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for the privilege.
And we were speaking at the Warsaw Security Forum.
Could German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Vladimir Putin really get back on talking terms? Well, media reports have suggested that Scholz is considering a call to Putin, but a German minister has revealed to TVP World it's not on the table.
Following the initial shock of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Germany, alongside most other Western countries, decided to go cold turkey on contacting the Kremlin in December 2022. In the years since, the most popular approach was to not call Vladimir Putin unless he was ready to end the war on Kiev's terms.
I think the West still lives within the illusion that you can still talk to Russia, you can democratize Russia, and that there is any way out of this war rather than defeating Russia. So there is no point speaking with Russia, as there is usually no point speaking to the terrorist.
That, however, might soon change, according to reports from Germany's Die Zeit newspaper, citing government sources. It is not yet clear as to what the topic of the talks could be. During a panel put on by TVP World at the Warsaw Security Forum, Anna Luhrmann, the German Minister of State for Europe and Climate, said no plans for such a phone call were made.
Your Chancellor is going to, at least we've got this unofficial statement that he's going to make a phone call and speak to...
No, that's not true.
Is it not true?
He said in an interview a few weeks ago that if time arises, there might be a potential that maybe, but this clearly is in the context of the ongoing efforts also together with Ukraine to work on the peace formula of President Zelensky, on the ongoing effort of having another round of a peace conference. I attended the one now in Switzerland. So this is not an imminent...
So it's not going to happen, basically, this phone call from
Not an imminent
Olaf Scholz
thing, no.
What we do know is the supposed time frame of when it could happen. The fated phone call is rumored to be planned to take place ahead of the G20 summit in Brazil, which starts November 18th. Some say if the rumors about Berlin's move are true, it could paint Germany and Europe as weak in the eyes of Putin.
I think any contact with Putin like this needs to be discussed thoroughly with the Ukrainians, the Poles, and the Americans at least, so we don't have an impression of divisions within the transatlantic community.
While speculations have already emerged about what Olaf Scholz could be trying to accomplish with this call, so far no one knows exactly what his objective is, apart from the Chancellor himself.
Despite Western support, Ukraine is still lacking equipment and ammunition in its fight on the front line. That's why Kyiv is now focusing on its own military production, including testing its first ballistic missile and planning to produce more than 1 million drones. Let's go live to Kyiv, where our correspondent Oz Chatterjee is standing by. Good evening, Oz. What more can you tell us about President Zelensky's plans?
Good evening. So we learned an insight slightly into Zelensky's plans for ramping up domestic defense production in his remarks at the second International Defense Forum in Ukraine, in which he said many topics, including that Ukraine had exponentially ramped up ammunition production, is now producing 25 times more ammunition production than this time last year. And again, talking about now, Zelensky had announced that they had successfully tested a ballistic missile in August. He didn't give much more details, but we've learned more details now about that this ballistic missile domestically produced and successfully passed its flight test. So it might still be a while before we see it potentially in the field. But Ukraine is definitely ploughing forward, looking forward towards ramping up its own domestic supplies so it can deal with some of the threats coming from Russia that's not able to deal with using Western weapons, still forbidden to use them inside Russian territory. Let's take a listen to some of what Zelensky had to say.
The general quantity of drones that we are able to produce in Ukraine annually is 4 million. More than 1.5 million drones were contracted to be produced. We are already using a new type of Ukrainian weapon, long-range drone missile Palyanytsia. In extremely difficult conditions of the full-scale war under constant Russian strikes, Ukrainians were able to build a virtually new defense industry.
Now, Zelensky has talked about these drones. These drones have had significant impact in recent days, striking targets deep inside Russia, particularly ammunition warehouses that have caused some spectacular secondary explosions in recent weeks. Now, Ukraine will be hoping to continue to ramp up the pressure. The last few weeks have also seen the largest Ukrainian drone attacks on Russia since the war began. All of that stems from Ukraine concentrating on production, getting investment into its defense sector, and ramping up that production to be used in the field. Back to you in the studio.
And we'll be watching those developments with interest. Thank you, Oz Chatterjee, our correspondent in Kyiv. Former Deputy Justice Minister Marcin Romanowski has lost his immunity in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. The prominent member of the Conservative Law and Justice Party is accused by the current administration of mishandling millions of euros of public funds. The waiving of the immunity is another step in the Polish government's wider investigation into the actions of the previous ruling party.
The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe has rejected the protests of the European Conservatives and Reformists when deciding on the waiving of immunity of Marcin Romanowski. MPs from the Polish ruling coalition believe it was the only appropriate solution.
We know that Mr. Romanowski was hiding behind the international immunity, but at the same time, his party is not respecting, for example, the European Court.
Marcin Romanowski had been charged by the state prosecution in July with mishandling millions of euro of public money and being part of an organized crime group. The Polish parliament waived his immunity back then, but the Warsaw District Court was forced to release him due to his second immunity in the Council of Europe. With both immunities now gone, he could be facing a second round of charges, according to TVP World's frequent guest, geopolitical analyst Piotr Kaczyński.
If they have pressed charges with, let's say, 20 issues, and now it's going to be 19 issues, and one of those are a bit different, then maybe it's a new case. So again, court will tell us exactly what's going to happen here.
Romanowski is accused of mishandling at least 20 million euro of public money from the Solidarity Fund, a pool of money for victims of crimes. The former Deputy Minister of Justice was caught on tape by one of his employees, describing fixed tenders for organizations lobbying for the then ruling Law and Justice Party. In essence, Romanowski and several other former Justice Ministry officials are accused of using public funds to buy votes ahead of 2023's parliamentary elections. Romanowski alone could face up to 15 years in prison.
There's been outrage after a manufacturer of fruit pouches for children released a similarly looking product containing strong alcohol. The so-called liquor pouches have fast become an issue of concern for Poland's top policymakers.
Fruit pouches like the one I'm holding now have become very popular with children and teens across Poland. Neat packaging and affordable price have translated into big success of the product. But now it seems to have a completely different target group. The vodka-filled product called Voodoo Monkey sparked outrage among Poles and prompted a strong response from the Speaker of the Polish Parliament, Szymon Hołownia.
I will not let it go, and I will be a pain in the neck for anyone willing to risk the lives of my child and her friends. We will ensure that there will be no such things in Poland.
Amid the all-round pressure, the manufacturer has pulled the product from shelves. The most disturbing fact was the packaging of the fruit pouch.
If my son or daughter had such a package in their backpack, or if I saw it on a driver in the street or on an employee, it wouldn't seem suspicious to me. This kind of packaging is easy to hide and easy to consume.
In response to the emergence of the liquor pouches, Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk pledged to slap controls on the product and announced that legal measures will be introduced to clamp down on alcohol in this sort of packaging.
The Minister of Health will prepare a bill that will systematically eliminate this type of threat. There is no room for any negotiation here. This type of threat must disappear.
Alcohol is one of the key factors contributing to crimes in Poland, social activist Jan Śpiewak said in an interview for TVP World.
Almost every day we hear stories about drivers that kill somebody or injured somebody, being intoxicated. Around 30% of crimes are being committed after drinking alcohol. Most of the murders are committed after drinking alcohol. Most of the rapes, domestic violence.
Alcohol in Poland is not only the fourth cheapest in the European Union. Strong alcohol is omnipresent at family celebrations and public events. Poles can buy alcohol at over 120,000 points of sale across the country, including petrol stations. For TVP World from Warsaw, Piotr Miszczuk.
Polish football star Wojciech Szczęsny has signed a deal with FC Barcelona. It comes just weeks after he announced his retirement, with the goalkeeper replacing Barcelona's Marc-Andre ter Stegen, who recently suffered a serious long-term injury.
A month ago, Wojciech Szczęsny surprised the football world when he announced that he intended to quit professional football.
What this new path will bring for me, only time will tell. But if the last 18 years have taught me anything, it is that nothing is impossible. And believe me, I'm going to dream big.
And these big dreams came true when Barcelona's main goalkeeper Marc-Andre ter Stegen suffered a serious injury which will most likely prevent him from playing till the end of the season. The club immediately started looking for a last-minute replacement. Szczęsny's name was often included in the possible transfer talks.
The opportunity to join Barcelona or Real Madrid comes once in a lifetime, and Wojciech would, if Wojciech did not sign with Barcelona, I feel like he would have regretted that.
Having previously played in Juventus and Arsenal, among others, in Barcelona Szczęsny will join another Polish football superstar, Robert Lewandowski, and the club has very lofty ambitions for this season.
And we return now to our coverage of the Warsaw Security Forum, where TVP World's Don Arleth spoke to chess grandmaster and Russian opposition political activist Garry Kasparov.
And we're at the Warsaw Security Forum, and my next guest here is Garry Kasparov, Russian opposition leader. Sir, thank you very much for joining us on TVP World.
Thanks for having me.
So, starting our conversation today, I'd like to start with the situation in Ukraine. How do you assess Ukraine's current position in the war?
I'm not a military expert. I can analyze the data that's available for all of us. I mean, it doesn't look good. I don't think it's as tragic as some of the Western media and politicians try to present. I think Ukraine just shows phenomenal resilience. And just for a moment, imagine that if me and everybody would be told on February 24th, 2022, that we would be in this situation today, I think we say, wow, that's impossible. They would not be able to survive for more than 2.5 years. And I don't think Putin would be happy to hear this kind of scenario. But obviously, we should not simply look back to February 24, 2022. We can look at this summer 2023. I mean, so many missed opportunities because the free world, led by the United States, failed to do a fundamental thing in every war, in every business, to define strategic goal. Instead of saying Ukraine must win, which also means Russia must lose, we hear all sorts of ambiguous statements. We stand as long as it takes. Ukraine cannot lose. Russia cannot win. Absolute nonsense. So the lack of the strategic clarity in defining the goals of this war, that's what hurts Ukraine. They're making huge sacrifices, and every time, when there's a setback, we hear from Europeans or American politicians, maybe we have to look for a negotiated settlement. There is no negotiated settlement because Vladimir Putin's goal is, and is not going to change, according to him and his propaganda, to destroy Ukrainian statehood. And every negotiated settlement, ceasefire, Putin will view as just as a next step, a stage to prepare for the final assault.
We hear from, we have obviously the elections coming up in the United States. We hear from candidate Trump and his vice presidential candidate that potentially they would solve the war in 24 hours. They haven't given specific details of exactly how this could go, but some have speculated that it could be trading some land, some Ukrainian land, for neutrality. Your thoughts on this? Is this a possibility? Would this be accepted by the Ukrainian side?
Now, is it possibility that Trump would move in this direction? Absolutely. Trump views every political act as a transactional. So, and selling Ukrainian territory for making deal with Putin, that's very much, that's in Trump's mind. Whether Ukrainians accept or not, I cannot tell. I don't think we can talk about the end of war. Okay, Trump doesn't care, but we should pay attention to words. The war doesn't end with a deal, because again, the Putin's goal of this war is still to destroy Ukrainian statehood, and that's why temporary ceasefire, especially if it doesn't offer Ukraine ironclad guarantees, which could be only NATO membership or boots on the ground. Since none of these are just, the options are available, that's not the end of the war.
People in Ukraine say, some people have said this is Putin's war. You hear this a lot in the West. And I'd like to ask you in specific, is this Vladimir Putin's war, or is this a large chunk of Russian society's war as well?
Look, it's a kind of a scholastic debate because, when you would talk about, World War II, was it Hitler's war? Because we always say, but massive German population supported the war. Mm-hmm. So as of Russia today, I think that the support for Putin's war in Russia today is, I would say, probably significantly lower than the support for Hitler's war, because there's no real ideology behind it. But we should say that, approximately 1/3 of the population is definitely, just into the war. This was full vigor, with a really small chunk of population opposing it on moral grounds. Majority, 50% plus, doesn't care, but they have to live with that. The problem today is that, the war goes for too long. People have to survive. And the West did absolutely nothing to attract Russians that are against the war and willing to leave because they don't know where to go. Putin won propaganda war on two fronts. Internationally, because we could see how Russia today spread this fake news, and we could see the impact of Russian propaganda in America, in Austria, in Germany, in Hungary. I mean, it's almost across Europe, in France. But he also succeeded in Russia convincing most Russians that this is the war between Russia and the West. And the lack of the comprehensive policy. What about millions of Russians? Again, let's say it's 5%. You still talk about millions of Russians that would like to go. Where do they go? And don't forget, these Russians could actually, if they leave, they could put Putin's economy in jeopardy because who's going to leave? Computer experts, engineers, financiers. Take 1 million of these people out of Russia, and I'm not sure Putin can continue the war. But as of today, it's all, it's like a wall. And that's why, I think many opportunities to create what I call like a free France, the goal, free Russia, has been missed.
So for Russia to change, what is it going to take? The absolute defeat of Vladimir Putin?
Look, this
collapse of the regime?
Let's not speculate. It's not I'm saying or you saying or somebody else. Russian history gives us a very clear indication what happens if regime wins the war or loses the war. It's just for 200 years you have unmistakable pattern. Napoleon War, victory, triumph, reforms of abolishing serfdom that were prepared by Alexander Speransky. Forget about it. Crimean War, 1854-1855, terrible defeat. Abolition of serfdom and Alexander II, great reforms, liberal reforms. So, Russo-Japanese War, defeat, constitutional monarchy, parliament. World War I, not a defeat but stalemate, regime couldn't show strength, revolution. World War II, Stalin is victorious, regime gets stronger, and they're still using World War II as the excuse for all the repressions and crimes of the Soviet regime. Afghanistan, Cold War, loss. The end of the Soviet Union. Nothing else but the total defeat of Putin's army in Ukraine can offer Russia a chance. We're not fighting just Putin or his cronies, we're fighting the imperial virus. And the only way to eradicate this virus from the minds of ordinary Russians, it's a shocking therapy. Nothing short of Ukrainian flag in Sevastopol. They have to see empire is dead.
Do you think that there were certain mistakes, policies of the West after the breakup of the Soviet Union that led to Vladimir Putin's rise and the current Russia looking as it does?
I wouldn't call it a mistake because mistake means you tried. There was lack of policy. The Cold War ended up with a triumph of the free world. And what was the best-selling book of 1992? The End of History. That was a mood. I mean, great book, by the way. I read it. I also enjoyed it. Francis Fukuyama, 1992. But it was, it was a reflection of the expectations that that's over. The history is over. We won, and let's get rich. Let's make money. But the end of the Soviet Union didn't mean the end of this conflict between good and evil, between free world and unfree world. And also, we all made a mistake, not recognizing that the Soviet ideology was a cover-up of Russian imperialism. The real challenge is Russian imperialism. So that's why it's a time now, and the group that I founded, Free Russia Forum, we believe that is our utmost goal is to fight the imperial even symbols. You know, for instance, the flag that I have here, it says "No more blood on Russian flag," or washing the lower stripe. We believe that the coat of arms, the double-headed eagle, those are symbols of the empire that have to be challenged. And don't forget, symbols are so important. What was the first act of Vladimir Putin when he was elected president of Russia? Restoring Soviet anthem. We just have to recognize that it's time now to look, at these 30+ years, have a very harsh look, recognize the mistake that we didn't want to actually come up with a plan, and also time for the free world to offer the vision. The Cold War was somehow easy, like in chess, black and white. After 1992, there was no vision. So what is the United Nations today? I mean, this is 2/3 of the UN countries. They're run by dictators, authoritarian leaders, some thugs, terrorists. That's not the United Nations we need today. We need League of Democracies, like late Senator McCain advocated. We have to start changing things, and we need leadership. We don't need managers. We need vision, because we are at war, and these guys, Russia, China, they fight the war. They're serious. They're not taking it lightly. We just have to pay, back with the same currency.
Garry Kasparov, Russian opposition leader, thank you very much for joining us today and expressing your thoughts. Very interesting conversation. Thank you. And that concludes this edition here from the Warsaw Security Forum. Thank you for watching, and stay with us here on TVP World for more.
And that also concludes World News Tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.